the woman who had everything except peace. Expanded. Everyone in Lagos knew Ifoma Kingsley, whether they had ever seen her in person or not. Her face stared down from glossy magazine covers at airports and lounges. Business analysts quoted her strategies like scripture. She was the woman who had risen from a modest background to build one of West Africa's most powerful logistics empires before 40. People said she was fearless, ruthless, untouchable. What they didn't know was that every night, after the gates of her Ikoyi mansion closed and the generators hummed softly, Ifoma felt unbearably alone. Her house was beautiful, too beautiful. White walls that never held laughter long enough. Expensive art that said nothing about her life. Hallways that echoed when she walked through them alone in heels, still dressed in power long after the world had stopped watching. The only place that felt real was her son's room. Chidi was 7 years old, slim and thoughtful, with eyes that seemed to notice everything adults tried to hide. He loved books about bridges and airplanes. He liked asking, why more than playing video games? And every night, without fail, he wanted his mother to sit on the edge of his bed until he fell asleep. That evening, Ifoma was late again. A board meeting had dragged on. Someone had questioned her authority, another man who smiled politely while waiting for her to fail. By the time she reached home, her shoulders ached from holding herself upright all day. She slipped into Chidi's room quietly. He was still awake. "Mummy," he said softly, setting his book aside. "You promised." Guilt hit her harder than any insult in the boardroom. "I know, my love," she said, sitting beside him. "I'm here now." For a few minutes, they talked about his school project, about bridges and how they don't fall if they're built properly. Then his voice changed, careful, almost hesitant. "Mummy, why don't I have a daddy like the others?" The question landed without warning, sharp and deep. Ifoma's heart stalled. She had prepared for many things in life, hostile takeovers, lawsuits, betrayal, but not this, not the quiet honesty in her child's voice. She smiled, the way she had learned to smile through pain. "Families come in different ways, Chidi." He nodded, but his eyes stayed fixed on hers. "But did he not want us?" The room felt suddenly too small. She remembered that day years ago, the phone call, the cold voice, the silence after she said she was pregnant. How she had sat on the floor of her first apartment, shaking, promising herself she would never need anyone again. She swallowed now. Some people are not strong enough to stay. Chidi considered this. Then he asked, "Will you ever marry?" The question made her laugh, but the sound was thin. "I don't know," she admitted. He turned on his side. "I just want someone who will stay, even when things are hard." After he slept, Ifoma stayed there long after, staring at his ceiling, her chest heavy with a truth she rarely faced. Money had protected them, but it had not healed everything. A week later, the doctor confirmed what she had been sensing. Chidi's frequent illnesses weren't just physical. Stress, emotional withdrawal, too much pressure on a child who had learned early that his mother carried the world alone. An older consultant, a man who had practiced medicine longer than she had been alive, looked at her gently. "Madam," he said, "this boy needs stability, not luxury, a consistent male presence, someone who chooses him." That night, Ifoma drove herself. No security convoy, no destination, just her and the road. Lagos moved around her in familiar chaos, horns, streetlights, vendors weaving between cars. At a red light near an old market, she slowed to a stop. That was when she noticed him. He was helping a woman lift a sack onto her head, steadying it carefully. His clothes were worn but clean. His movements were calm, deliberate. When another trader tried to overpay him, he shook his head and returned the extra note. No begging, no performance. Just work. Chidi leaned forward in his seat, pressing his face to the glass. "Mummy, he looks kind." Ifoma followed her son's gaze. For reasons she couldn't explain, her chest tightened. The light changed, cars honked, life moved on. But something inside her did not. That night, lying awake in her vast, silent bedroom, Ifoma realized something terrifying. For the first time in her life, she was not looking for power. She was looking for peace. And she had no idea how much it would cost her. The first thing Sadik learned about poverty was that it stripped a man in layers. Not all at once, slowly, quietly. First, it took comfort, then options, then the way people looked at you, eyes sliding past as if you were part of the pavement. But the last thing it tried to take, the thing Sadik fought hardest to protect, was dignity. Every morning before dawn, he washed his face at a public tap behind the market. He scrubbed his hands carefully, trimmed his beard with a cracked mirror, and pulled on the cleanest of his worn clothes. If he was going to carry other people's burdens, he would do it standing straight. Once, he had been more than this. He had been an engineering student at Ahmadu Bello University, the kind lecturers pointed to when they wanted an example. He loved structures, bridges, roads, anything that connected people across impossible gaps. His father had been a tailor, his mother a food seller, and every sacrifice they made had been stitched into his dreams. Then his father died suddenly. 6 months later, his mother followed. Debts appeared like ghosts, hospital bills, rent arrears, loans he hadn't known existed. Relatives promised help and vanished. Friends grew uncomfortable around his grief. School became impossible. Hunger arrived. By the time Sadik understood what was happening, life had already rerouted him. So he carried bags. The market became his classroom, the street his employer. Traders learned his name because he never cheated, never demanded, never lingered where he wasn't wanted. He accepted whatever was offered, even when it was insultingly small. What surprised him most was how quickly people forgot he was human. Until the day a black luxury car stopped too long at the traffic light. A woman sat inside, elegant, controlled, eyes sharp like someone used to command. A boy sat beside her, watching the world with open curiosity. Sadik noticed them, then looked away. He had learned not to stare at lives that were not his. Days passed. Then the woman returned. This time, she stepped out of the car. Her heels were impractical for the market, her posture unmistakable. People stared. Whispers followed her like smoke. "You," she said, pointing to him. "What is your name?" "Sadik," he answered evenly. "I need a driver," she said. "I'll pay well." He understood immediately what she saw when she looked at him. A man with nothing to lose. A convenient solution. "I'm not a driver," he replied. Her brows drew together. "Everyone can drive." "I choose my work," he said quietly. She stared at him, unused to refusal. "I can pay triple what you make here," she insisted. Sadik felt the familiar pull, hunger, need, survival. But he also felt something else, the warning in his chest that told him where a line was drawn. "I don't work where I'm pitied," he said, "and I don't belong to anyone." The market went silent. The woman looked like she had been struck. She left without another word. Sadik thought that was the end of it. He was wrong. A few days later, she returned with the boy. They sat on a low bench while he rested between jobs. The boy asked about the sacks he carried, about why bridges didn't fall if they were built properly, about whether honesty mattered when life was unfair. Sadik answered him the way he wished someone had answered him years ago. Simply, truthfully. The boy laughed, a bright, unguarded sound that startled Sadik. It had been a long time since anyone laughed with him, not at him. The woman watched silently. When they stood to leave, she thanked him. No money changed hands. That night, Sadik lay awake under the open sky, unsettled. Not by her wealth, but by her exhaustion. He had seen it before in his mother's eyes when she carried too much alone. A week later, she found him again. This time, her voice shook. "I need you to marry me." For a moment, Sadik thought he had misheard. Then anger flared, sharp and humiliating. "I am not for sale," he said, his voice low. She didn't argue. Instead, she said the words that cut deeper than insult. "I'm not offering money. I'm asking for mercy." She spoke of her son, of abandonment, of doctors and fear, of a child who needed a man who would not disappear. For the first time, Sadek truly saw her. Not the billionaire, not the powerful woman. A mother, standing at the edge of something she could not buy her way out of. Silence stretched between them. Sadek looked down at his hands, scarred, calloused, honest. He owned nothing, but he knew what it meant to stay. And that knowledge frightened him more than poverty ever had. The first headline came out before the sun rose. Billionaire CEO to marry homeless bag carrier. By noon, it was everywhere, phones buzzing, televisions murmuring in offices, laughter spilling across social media like oil. People dissected Ifoma Kingsley's life with the confidence of strangers who believed wealth erased pain. Some said she had lost her mind. Others said it was a publicity stunt. Many said Sadek was a parasite who had struck gold. Inside her glass-walled office, Ifoma sat very still as her board members spoke over one another. This will damage the brand. Investors are calling. You cannot attach the company's image to a man with no background. She listened without interrupting. When they finally fell silent, she said softly, "You hired me to build value. I did that. You did not hire me to choose my husband." The room froze. That evening, Sadek watched the news from a small roadside cafe. He saw his own face, poorly lit, badly framed, paired with words like conman and opportunist. His chest tightened. He hadn't asked for this storm. He hadn't wanted to be seen at all. That night, he packed his few belongings. He found Ifoma sitting alone in her living room, heels kicked off, hair undone. For the first time since he had known her, she looked small. "I can leave," he said quietly. "You don't need this trouble." She looked up, eyes shining. "I didn't ask you because it was easy." Before he could answer, Chitty walked in. He stopped when he saw the bag. "You're going away," the boy said. Sadek knelt in front of him. "I don't want to, but sometimes people leave so others don't get hurt." Chitty's lips trembled. He wrapped his arms around Sadek's neck. "Everyone leaves," he whispered. "Please don't." Something inside Sadek broke open. He stayed. The wedding was small, no press, no speeches about success, just a quiet registry office and a few witnesses who mattered. Ifoma wore a simple dress. Sadek wore a borrowed suit. When they exchanged vows, his voice shook. "I don't have money to promise," he said, "but I have my word, and I know how to stay." She answered through tears. "I don't need saving, I need sharing." Marriage did not transform their lives overnight. Sadek refused gifts, refused shortcuts. He enrolled back in school, took night classes, studied until his eyes burned. He wanted his son to see effort, not entitlement. Chitty flourished. He slept better, laughed more, began introducing Sadek proudly as my dad. At school events, Sadek sat on plastic chairs beside other parents, clapping until his palms stung. One night, Chitty fell sick with fever. Panic gripped Ifoma, old fears rising fast. But Sadek didn't panic. He sat by the bed, wiping sweat, murmuring stories about bridges that never collapsed because their foundations were strong. Chitty slept. So did Ifoma, for the first time in years. The world eventually grew bored. Scandals moved on, mockery faded. What remained was a family that learned each other slowly, imperfectly, honestly. Years later, at a university graduation, a tall young man crossed the stage, Chitty Kingsley Sadek, engineering degree in hand. He looked into the crowd and found his parents. His mother, elegant but softer now. His father, standing tall in a well-worn suit, eyes wet with pride. A reporter asked Ifoma afterward, "Do you regret begging a homeless man to marry you?" She smiled, a real smile, unguarded. "I didn't beg a homeless man," she said. "I begged a good man who knew how to stay." And that changed everything. Sadek took her hand. Together, they walked away, proof that sometimes love doesn't rise from wealth. It rises from humility, courage, and the decision to remain when leaving would be easier. And that is how the world laughed, until love answered back.
And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Folktale by T Vibes.